Where the silence stayed, a winter's return to the forgotten house where memories slept, and time moved like snow, quiet, slow, and unspoken beneath the ice. The train's arrival was quiet, a soft whisper of metal on rails that barely disturbed the peace of the early morning. She stepped off the platform with a calmness that was almost unnatural, as though she had become one with the stillness of the world around her. The wind tugged at her coat, but it didn't hurry her. She moved as though every step was a decision made long ago, part of a path that had long been drawn in the snow beneath her feet. The village was quiet, as though frozen in a moment that had lingered long after the years had passed. The houses stood in neat rows, their roofs burdened with layers of snow, the pale blue of the sky hanging low above them. It was a picture of simplicity, one that didn't need embellishing. No one stirred. The only sounds were the occasional flutter of a bird in the trees and the faint rattle of windows against a gust of wind. She knew the streets well, too well perhaps. The small stone walls that lined the road were now chipped and weathered. The rusting signpost at the corner that once pointed toward the lake. The old oak tree near the town square where children used to gather is now bare of leaves and standing silent against the backdrop of snow. Nothing had changed, but at the same time, everything had. The people, the conversations, the places, everything had been rearranged in some quiet corner of her memory, waiting for her to return. She didn't rush. The time she had left behind was no longer pressing on her, nor was there a need to rush toward the future. Each step took her farther into the heart of the village, where the cobblestones were slick with ice, and the air seemed to have a thickness to it, like it was holding its breath. The small white house stood at the far end, just beyond the bend in the road where the path split into two. The once pristine garden now sat in disarray, the gate sagging slightly to the side, as if it too had aged in her absence. Yet there was something strangely comforting about it all. The home was untouched, frozen in time as if it had been waiting patiently for her to return. When she stepped through the front gate, the crunch of snow beneath her boots seemed to echo louder than it should have. She paused for a moment to glance around at the once vibrant garden, now overrun with wild growth, and the tree by the porch where the swing had once hung. The house itself was as it always had been, its walls slightly yellowed from age, the roof sagging ever so slightly beneath the weight of years of winter snow. The front steps, cracked and worn from years of use, led up to a porch that still had remnants of paint clinging to its edges, though much of it had chipped away. She pushed open the gate slowly, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. There was a certain resignation in the sound, as if even the gate knew what had been lost. The yard was cluttered with snow and memories, a place once full of life now quiet and still, like an old photograph kept in the dark. Inside the house, the air was cold and stale, as though the rooms had been holding their breath in anticipation of her return. She shut the door behind her softly, the weight of it closing like a final chapter on something long ago forgotten. The light that filtered through the windows was weak and pale, as though the sky itself had grown tired of the winter's grasp. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunlight, suspended in the quiet air. The house had not been disturbed. No furniture moved, no object shifted. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythm a constant companion to the stillness that surrounded her. Her footsteps echoed through the rooms, though they didn't feel like her own. She walked with the weight of years in each step, the familiarity of each corner a reminder of the past that had both defined her and eluded her. She moved through the kitchen, where the wooden cabinets stood like old friends, their paint worn down from countless years of use. She ran her fingers across the countertop, leaving a trail in the dust. Nothing had changed, but it felt like a lifetime ago. The living room, where the worn couch sat under a blanket of dust, was the same, yet different. It seemed smaller now, the walls closer, the furniture less comforting. She traced the edges of the table with her fingers, the chipped wood a reminder of the years spent gathering around it, once filled with conversation and laughter. Now it stood empty, just like the house. The stairs creaked beneath her feet as she ascended slowly, taking her time as she moved to the second floor. The hallway was narrow, the light dimmer up here. She paused at the first door, the one that led to the bedroom. It was always the coldest room in the house, but she had always liked it that way. She opened the door and stepped inside, the faint scent of old wood and lavender hanging in the air. The bed was still made, the blankets undisturbed, though the curtains had long since faded from sunlight. The small dresser at the corner of the room held the same trinkets and photos she remembered, though now they seemed like relics of someone else's life. She didn't touch them. There was no need. Instead, she moved to the window and looked out. The view from here hadn't changed. The same stretch of land, the same curve of the road, the same fence line leading off into the distance. The trees, bare and shivering in the wind, stood like sentinels on the horizon. The sky was gray, the clouds heavy with the promise of more snow. It had always been like this during winter, quiet, still, and heavy with expectation. The days that followed unfolded like a slow, deliberate rhythm. She woke early, not out of habit, but because the house demanded it. The world outside was still, the light faint as it filtered through the windows, unable to fight off the ever-present fog of winter. She made tea in the mornings, taking her time as the water boiled and the leaves steeped. The smell filled the room with warmth, but it didn't reach her. She drank it slowly, savoring the taste but never allowing it to soothe her completely. The house did not demand much of her, but she gave it what it wanted. She swept the floors, washed the dishes, and lit a fire in the stove in the evening. The crackle of the flames was a familiar sound, though it didn't bring the comfort it once had. It was just another noise, another reminder that things could still be done, still be fixed. The warmth from the fire wrapped around her, but it was fleeting. The cold always returned, finding its way into every corner of the house. Each day she walked beyond the village, down the narrow paths that led to places she had not visited in years. She followed the trail to the stream, the one that ran through the woods and past the small bridge. The stream was nearly frozen now, the ice spreading across its surface, but the water beneath still moved, still whispered its song to anyone willing to listen. She sat by the bank, her legs drawn up to her chest, watching the way the water shifted under the ice. She could hear it if she listened closely enough, the soft murmurs of something alive, something that refused to be still. The air was thin and the sky above was a pale blue, empty except for the occasional bird drifting on the breeze. The silence of the place was not the silence of isolation, but of waiting. Waiting for something, though she could not name it. The landscape, the trees, the distant mountains, they all seemed to be waiting, frozen in time, their branches bare and exposed, ready for whatever would come next. She visited the lake on the 4th day. The walk was longer, but she didn't mind. The lake lay at the edge of the village, its surface a mirror of the sky above. Today it was covered with a thin sheet of ice, cracking in places where the water still shifted beneath. She sat by the shore for a long time, the wind sharp against her skin, biting through her coat. The world seemed distant, unfocused, like it was a place she no longer belonged. The house seemed to pull her back each evening. She returned to it as one returns to something inevitable, to something that both sustains and confines. The walls were thick with memories, and yet it felt as though none of them truly belonged to her. It was a home, but not hers. She could not say why she had come back, nor what she was hoping to find. The notebook waited for her on the kitchen table. Each morning she added another line, another fragment, another observation. The way the frost formed on the windows in the morning, the taste of tea after the second pour, the way the wind pressed against the walls, as if the house too was holding its breath. She didn't write for anyone. She wrote for the moment, for the things that passed through her fingers like water through the ice. She wrote to remember what could so easily slip away. The notebook was becoming her only companion. On the 6th night, as snow began to fall again, she sat in the dark kitchen, the light from the stove casting long shadows across the walls. She placed the pen down and stared out the window. The snowflakes fell, heavy and slow, a blanket over the village, over the world. She did not know what it was she was waiting for, but she knew that whatever it was, it had not yet arrived. The quiet, the stillness, it felt like a presence in itself. And she let it stay, as one lets the winter stay. A guest who arrives uninvited but becomes a part of the house, of the air. Perhaps it was just the way it was meant to be. Perhaps she had come back not to change the world around her, but to wait alongside it, to stay through the winter that would not end. The days had slipped into one another, indistinguishable and endless. The village, once lively with whispers of the seasons changing, now stood silent beneath an endless gray sky, as if it too had surrendered to the weight of winter. The house, too, seemed to have settled into a quiet surrender, its once familiar creaks and sighs now muffled, as though the walls were trying to hold their breath. She had spent the last few days wandering the house in a haze, her movements slow, her thoughts distant. Each step she took echoed against the emptiness, each room colder than the last. The stove, once a source of warmth, now only exhaled a faint glow that barely reached the far corners of the room. The fire crackled weakly, its heat fleeting, vanishing into the cold air before it could comfort her. She had not written in the notebook for weeks. The pages once filled with her delicate script had turned brittle, the words now fading into nothing. She could no longer recall the purpose of the thoughts that had once seemed so important. The need to record her emotions, to capture the fleeting moments of clarity, had vanished, leaving only emptiness behind. The house had become her entire world, and in that small, quiet space, she had come to realize that nothing truly changed. The seasons would pass, the snow would eventually melt, but she would remain here, waiting for a change that would never come. The wind howled outside, its mournful cry slipping through the cracks in the walls. The night had come too quickly, the darkness now thick and unyielding. She stood at the window, staring out at the snow-covered garden. The trees were bare, their branches twisted and fragile, bowed under the weight of the snow. The world was cold and still, a perfect mirror of the emptiness that had taken root within her. The house seemed to hum with the quiet of the night, the shadows in the corners of each room stretching like tendrils, reaching out to claim her. She felt the chill settle deeper into her bones, her hands numb against the cold glass of the window. The snow had begun to fall again, slow and deliberate, as though the earth itself was trying to bury the remnants of what had been. She did not move. She could not. The house was a cage, and she was its prisoner. A soft knock echoed from the front door, a sound so faint that at first she thought it was part of her imagination. She waited, her breath held, but the knock came again, louder this time. The sound was out of place, a sharp contrast to the stillness of the night. Her body tensed, and for a moment she considered ignoring it. But then, as if drawn by some unseen force, she found herself moving toward the door. The cold air rushed in as she opened it, her breath clouding in front of her. But there was no one there, only the emptiness, the vast, untouched snow that stretched out in every direction. The wind tugged at her coat, pulling her deeper into the night. Her heart quickened, and for a brief moment, she felt a strange sense of disconnection from everything, as though she were floating, suspended in a moment that didn't belong to her. She stepped out onto the porch, her boots sinking into the snow. The world was silent, save for the wind which seemed to circle her, pulling at her hair, swirling the snow around her feet. She took a few tentative steps forward, but then stopped. There, at the edge of the yard, something caught her eye, a figure. It was difficult to make out in the darkness, but she knew at once what it was. The shadow of the well, the stone structure standing silent in the middle of the yard. She had never paid much attention to it. It had always been there, a relic of the past, of something long forgotten. But now it seemed to call to her. The wind howled louder, urging her toward it, as if it had always been waiting for her to return. She walked toward the well slowly, each step heavier than the last, as though the earth itself were holding her back. The snow crunched beneath her feet, each sound a reminder that she was still tethered to the world, to this moment, to the waiting silence of the night. When she reached the well, she stood there for a long time, her hand resting on the cold stone. The darkness within it seemed to reach up to her, as though it were waiting for her to peer into its depths. She looked down, but the darkness swallowed the light, and she could see nothing. The wind carried with it the faintest whisper, like a voice calling from far away, but it was impossible to tell if it was real or just the wind playing tricks. A heavy sigh escaped her lips, and she turned away, her fingers still grazing the stone as she walked back toward the house. The world felt smaller now, the shadows in the yard longer, stretching toward her like dark fingers reaching out to pull her in. The snow continued to fall, but it no longer felt like a blanket. It felt like a shroud, covering everything in its icy grip. The house loomed ahead, the door still ajar, waiting for her return. She stepped inside, the warmth of the stove only a faint memory now. The silence was thicker than ever, pressing down on her, filling the spaces between the rooms, between her thoughts. She moved through the house, her movements slow and deliberate, but they were mechanical, like a marionette tugged along by invisible strings. She passed the living room, where the furniture sat undisturbed, the dust settling quietly on the surfaces. The photographs on the walls had long since faded, the faces of the people in them growing more distant with each passing day. She had not spoken to anyone in weeks. The villagers had all retreated into their own lives, their own families, leaving her to wait in this house, in this winter. She stopped by the window again, staring out into the night, her breath fogging the glass. The world outside was nothing but white, the snow falling relentlessly, as if the earth itself was trying to erase all traces of what had been. Her heart ached with an emptiness that she could not describe, a hollow space that seemed to grow with each passing moment. But she was not afraid. She had not been afraid in a long time. The weight in her chest felt heavier now, and she felt a sudden weariness, a fatigue that seeped into her bones. Her legs trembled as she turned away from the window and stumbled toward the kitchen. The cold air from the open door seemed to follow her, wrapping itself around her as she moved. She leaned against the counter, her hands shaking, her breath shallow and uneven. It was then that she felt it. The first wave of dizziness, the sharpness in her head, the sense that the world was slipping away. She grasped the edge of the counter, her fingers tightening around the wood, but it did not help. The room began to tilt, the walls closing in around her, the shadows stretching longer, consuming everything. She crumpled to the floor. Her body felt like lead, too heavy to move, too weak to resist the pull of the darkness. Her vision blurred, the room spinning in and out of focus. She tried to take a breath, but her chest constricted, the air refusing to fill her lungs. The cold from the floor seeped into her skin, and she could feel the sharpness of it, biting at her, numbing her. The wind outside howled again, and she closed her eyes. The stillness of the room settled in around her, a quiet that no longer felt like peace, but something final. She no longer felt the cold, no longer heard the wind. There was only silence, and in it she felt herself slipping away. Her fingers twitched, but they could no longer hold on to the world. The shadows of the house, of the village, and of the long, drawn-out winter seemed to welcome her as she let go. The snow continued to fall outside. This extended tragic ending brings the character